Take a lobster from the sea. And place it in a fishmonger's window alongside a crab. A beginning and an end of one story of the Scottish creel fishing industry. But to go back to the beginning, to the Berwickshire fishing village of Bournemouth. Alistair and Ian have gone to pull a box out of the harbour. In it, they store all the lobsters they catch on the rocks until they have enough to sell at the auction. When sold, they will account for only a tiny fraction of the £250,000,000 worth of lobsters and crabs landed round the Scottish coast each year. But still, the boys lower their box carefully back into the harbour so that the lobsters will be kept alive and in good condition. Meanwhile, the boats from Bournemouth are fishing for lobsters out in the bay. Other Bournemouth boats, like the Dolly Graham, are a few miles south, 6 or 7 miles offshore from Berwick-on-Tweed, where in the deeper waters there is good crab fishing. The net is out for bait for the creels. Mackerel, flounders, haddock or whiting are wanted. The winch coils automatically. The net closes. The final haul begins. Some of the fish will be sold, and some of it will be used as bait for the creels. Now the skipper can head for the fishing grounds where the creels were lowered yesterday. While the boat sails on, the crew are busy preparing the bait for the creels. At length, the skipper sights their marker buoy. It marks one end of a rope on which 50 or 60 creels are strung at regular intervals. The creels have been on the seabed for 12 or 16 hours. Now the time has come to haul them aboard. The winch rattles into life, and the first creel breaks the surface. Crabs have been caught in some of the creels. Sometimes only one crab, but sometimes 3 or more. One creel is brought aboard every few seconds. They are emptied quickly, and soon the crab boxes begin to fill. Although the Dolly Graham is fishing on crab ground, lobsters are often caught. A lobster's in this creel. More care in taking it out, for if roughly handled, it may easily shed a valuable claw. So the hard work goes on until the 50 or 60 creels have been emptied, baited and stacked in the bow of the boat. The marker at the other end of the rope is hauled aboard. That done, the skipper steers the boat to another part of the fishing ground. There is a chance now to bind the lobster's claws so that they do not damage one another in the boxes. The skipper has decided to shoot the creels. The boat does not stop, and one by one the creels go over the side. They must be shot in the right order and just at the right moment, otherwise the rope will become knotted and the creels may be damaged. Once all the creels are out, the Dolly Graham will go to another marker buoy and haul in another fleet of creels, empty them, bait them, and return them to the sea. And then to a third and a fourth and a fifth and a sixth marker buoy. In all, in their 9 hours at sea, the crew of the Dolly Graham may lift and return 400 creels. And having done that, the boat will return to Bournemouth. Before it gets there, there's much to be done. There's a law which says only crabs and lobsters over a certain size may be caught. Here, crabs about the smallest permitted size are being measured. If they're too small, they're returned to the sea. The decks must be washed down before reaching port, and things generally made shipshape. Most days about noon, Alistair and Ian can spot the Dolly Graham from the Bournemouth breakwater. Now she crosses the harbour bar to find Bournemouth a busy place. Other boats are already in, and the auction market will soon begin. When it comes to unloading the boat, there's a job for all the crew and anyone who likes to help. Box upon box of lobsters and crabs are brought ashore. They must be weighed before the sail. The auctioneer looks at an outsized lobster, big for the east coast, where fishing is intensive, so that lobsters seldom get a chance to grow very large. Now the buyers wait for the auction sale to begin. A wink confirms a deal in lobsters. What am I bid for 10 boxes of crab from the Dolly Graham? 10 boxes of crabs. Live crabs. Another wink sends many boxes and barrels to the crab processing factory at Berwick-on-Tweed. Other buyers send lorry loads of boxes of lobsters up the hill from Bournemouth and 2 miles north to the fishing port of Eyemouth. This is Eyemouth. From here, lobsters are sent to London and many other British cities, and to the continent. Frequently, lorries loaded with live lobsters go from Eyemouth, race down the Great North Road to Newcastle to catch a plane which will take the lobsters to Paris and Antwerp. To meet all these demands, just when they're made, the lobsters are stored in tanks at Eyemouth. Sometimes there may be as many as 30,000 lobsters in these tanks. A team of women packs the lobsters immediately before dispatch. This woman has found something unusual. She takes the lobster to the foreman. He immediately recognizes it as a tagged lobster and knows it should be returned to the Fisheries Research Station at Aberdeen. There, Dr. H.J. Thomas takes the tag off. The tag number tells him that this lobster is one of 100 tagged lobsters released near Bournemouth 4 months ago. It's the 50th to come back. He knows from this that half the adult lobsters living in that part of the sea are being caught. Now he measures it and notes other details. If very many more lobsters come back, and if there were similar returns from other parts of the coast, then the scientists would have to report that too many lobsters were being caught for the catches to be maintained. The government would then have to consider whether new regulations should be made to safeguard the industry, regulations which would make it illegal to take lobsters below a certain size. Thus, the scientists' tagging experiment is vitally important to the creel fishing industry. But although tags are firmly attached to the lobster, at intervals, lobsters cast off their hard outer covering, and the tag is lost. This process is called molting. Here is a lobster molting. The old covering is at the bottom of the picture, and the lobster is squeezing itself out through a split along the back. This lobster is molting in the aquarium of the Fisheries Research Laboratory at Aberdeen, where it can be watched and timed. It began to molt 20 minutes ago. The lobster which is coming out is a soft, tender-skinned animal. It leaves behind its old, hard outer covering. This, in fact, is hardened skin, which completely covers and protects the lobster. Because it is hard and rigid, growth is difficult, so the growing lobster has cast it off. Now it's almost free, and even as it is coming out, it is absorbing water and growing. A final effort. There, now it's out. It has taken 1 hour and a half. See how the old shell is quite empty. And hard. The lobster, however, is soft. The powerful claws which it normally uses to defend itself can be bent easily. Look how they've been distorted. This happened when they were being pulled out of the old shell. Yet, within an hour or two, they have filled out to their proper shape. The lobster molts in order to grow. To show by how much, the scientist measures first part of the old shell, and then the same part of the lobster. In the 2 hours since it cast, the lobster has grown 10%. Now Dr. Thomas has put the old shell together to show how the lobster got out. First, it splits down the middle here. Then the tail part splits away, and the lobster begins to pull itself out through this gap. Before it starts, the shell at the base of the claws softens to allow the broad part here to be pulled through this narrow region. Notice how the rubber bands on the claws have been left behind in the same way that a tag would be left behind. The skin of the soft lobster will gradually harden up and provide it with a hard outer covering which will protect it from other animals in the sea. Sometimes scientists want to mark lobsters permanently. They do this by punching marks right through the tail, like this. There is no numbering as with a tag, so the marks are arranged according to a code. If scientists are to be able to help the creel fishing industry, they must know not only how many lobsters are being caught, they must also study the young, where and how they live, and how many survive. Lobsters hatch from eggs as larvae, and larvae live among plankton in the surface waters of the sea. Here, Dr. Fraser has found a larval lobster in a sample of plankton. He takes it out to have a closer look at it under a binocular microscope. It is already beginning to look like the adult lobster in shape. Look at the developing big claws. Dr. Fraser's plankton samples are collected at sea by the fisheries research ships of the Scottish Home Department. This is a vertical haul plankton net being lowered over the side of the research ship Mara. The net has a very fine mesh. Plankton is the name given to all those living things, plants and animals that are drifted about by water movements in the sea. The plankton is trapped by the fine mesh of the net, and as the net is hauled up, the plankton is washed to the bottom and into a special container. The container is unscrewed and passed to Mr. Sinclair, another scientist in the ship's laboratory. He removes the sample and puts it in a jar with a note of date, time and place of sampling. The scientists on board also study fishing methods. The crew are baiting different types of creels. French, and Cornish. Scottish. As the Mara sails on round the Scottish coast, the lobsters caught in these creels will be tagged or marked and put back into the sea. Here, in the ship's laboratory, Dr. Thomas is measuring and marking a lobster. The research vessel Mara often sails to the most northerly parts of Scotland and to the islands. Here she is in the Pentland Firth, with the Orkneys to the north, and Duncansby Head and John O'Groats to the south. In the shelter of the long arm of Duncansby Head lie the harbours of Thurso and Scrabster. Creel fishing is important at both of these. Here at Thurso, newly landed lobsters are being taken to the local deep freeze plant. This is a new and important industry and provides a good, steady demand for all the locally landed lobsters and crabs. But these are not enough. The plant needs more than local fishermen can provide, so frequently lorry loads of crabs are brought from the west coast of Scotland. These crabs are caught by men like John MacDonald. He is a crofter fisherman who sometimes works on the land and sometimes is out on the Gairloch at his creels. Today he's out to collect his week's catch, which he has stored in boxes close inshore. And while he is busy there, Ian MacDonald, a full-time fisherman who spends all his days catching crabs, is nearing Gairloch Pier, bringing his week's catch to the waiting lorry. Gairloch Pier is a busy place when the lorry comes to collect the crabs. Sometimes the fisherman gets a welcome from the holidaymakers. Both John MacDonald and Ian MacDonald fish for crabs, but other crofter fishermen go for lobsters. Roddy MacLeod is one of them. By day, he's busy on the croft, helped by his family. He also finds time to run a car hire service and to cater for some of the many tourists who come to Loch Ewe. Then every afternoon, he becomes the postman and carries out the postal deliveries for 10 miles around. Even then, his day is not done, for every evening, except Sunday, Roddy MacLeod and his crew of 2 are off with the creels to the lobster grounds. Full-time fishermen also fish for lobsters off the west coast. Any evening at Badachrow and the Gairloch, you'll find Alec Mackenzie. He has come ashore for a box in which to store the lobsters he has caught in the day's fishing. It's late evening before Alec Mackenzie finishes his work, but yet early next morning he is packing the lobsters. Within 20 hours, the lobsters in that box will be on sale in the world's greatest fish market. But all the full-time and part-time fishermen working along the west coast and in the islands cannot catch enough lobsters to satisfy the markets in the south. That is why a fleet of bigger boats finds it worthwhile to go to the creel fishing. The fleet works from the fishing port of Mallaig. The boats go long distances to the Atlantic lobster beds off the west coast of the Hebrides. The crew of 5 stay at sea for 5 days, returning to Mallaig once a week for the auction market. Once sold, the lobsters are either stored in the Mallaig tanks for later distribution or sent south by rail at once. Thus they go south. Lobsters from Mallaig, from the remotest highlands and the distant islands. South to the markets, and then to the great hotels and restaurants of Britain and of many other countries, to be transformed into a delicacy fit for a royal banquet. Or they go to the fishmonger's slab, which is the end of the story. But this is a story without an end. By the time the lobsters and the crabs are sold, the crofters have forsaken the land, the big Mallaig boats are ready for another week's fishing, the Bournemouth boats are back at sea, the lorries are rolling south, and Alistair and Ian, well, the tide is coming in again.